start. Robert Moses is a name that you went over. You also discussed lobbying in the beginning of the book, and you wrote about how transit companies simply could not compete. Here is my question. Why is transit, which has shown to be such an effective way for us to get around, just been stifled, whether it is through bills, whether it's through politicians? Why is transit always on the short end of the stick?
Oh, yeah, that's such a great question. I mean, when I started reporting this book back in 2020, I had started covering a massive highway expansion in Houston called the North Houston Highway Improvement Project. And that will add capacity to this massive highway right through the middle of town. And I remember asking, like, very early on as I was doing interviews, TxDOT has sold this project as a way to fix congestion. Houston is booming. More people are moving there. We need to expand this highway to fix congestion. And I remember being like, well, why don't they just add a bus lane? Why don't they just add a bus rapid transit lane? That seems like the most effective way to fix congestion.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems like such a simple question. And I remember some of the advocates I was talking to were kind of like, like it's a simple question to ask and pretty complicated to answer. And like the shortest version I have come to, which took me, several years to report as I was working on my book, is like, I think the simplest explanation is Americans have been sold on the idea of cars as prosperity and freedom. So this started in the 1940s with the rise of, the automobile of Ford and General Motors, massive advertising campaigns to sell those cars to American consumers. Americans bought them in droves, in part because like they were pretty miraculous. This improvement in technology allowed people to move around untethered from a trolley line. Like they could go where they wanted to go when they wanted to go. Um, and planners and kind of the American sort of infrastructure establishment followed suit. We dedicated billions and billions of dollars to building roads to accommodate all of these cars that were pouring off mass factory lines. And as a result, we have the cities that we have today, where most cities in America are just covered in concrete, covered in highways, covered in massive roads. And within that framework, it's sort of hard to understand, like, how could transit ever work? And where I live is Austin. Like, it's really hard to take the bus anywhere. We don't have a very functional transit system, in part because our city is very sprawling. It came up around the car. But like that very much was a policy choice in the 40s and 50s and 60s. And a lot of what I do in my book is chronicle the fight around the interstate highway era with President Eisenhower in 1956. Eisenhower's intention for the interstate highway program was not to build massive highways right through the middle of our cities. It was to connect the country. It was to connect Houston to Dallas and New York to Los Angeles. But instead, what planners did is they built highways right through the middle of the city. And in the process, they destroyed a lot of transit systems. So what today seems kind of like this, inevitable outcome that it's, in most American cities, we don't have transit. Like the number of people I hear talking in Texas, like, well, we don't have transit now, so we can't build it. Well, that was a choice that we made 70 years ago, and we could make it again today.
Right. We could make it again. We could also just try to develop means for a greater good. And also, I noticed, you said it and I caught on to it, this being the theme of freedom. Like, first off, that term is thrown around like crazy these days, especially with Americans, even though we are losing our rights left and right. But when it comes to American freedom, why is it so tethered and associated? It seems intrinsically linked to a car.
It's a great question, and one that, like, again, is so cultural. It's not really like it does not stand to reason. Lots of other countries have wonderful transit systems, and people there report higher quality of lives, that they spend less of their disposable income on transportation. The air quality is better. They have fewer greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector. So, like, why are Americans so stubbornly kind of stuck on cars? And I think it's like two things. Is one is like, well, our political leaders have only built cities in which it is most convenient to get around in a car. So like it's very hard to imagine, or even in fact, like not even imagine, exist outside of a car in most American cities. If you don't have one, you don't have the same access to opportunity. So like indeed, it's true that because of infrastructure decisions that we made 70 years ago, like you are more free in most American cities if you have a car. But like I think what is tricky about that is like lots of places around the world have shown that you can actually change that policy decision. There are lots of European cities, Copenhagen, Paris, that have said, hey, we don't want this many cars in our city. We want to give people other options, and we're going to dedicate infrastructure funding to create those options, to build really robust transit. I mean, Mexico City is a great example. They had crushing air pollution, traffic goes gridlocked, and they built like an amazing world-class bus rapid transit system, and you can get a bus at Mexico City like almost every 3 minutes.
Oh,
So it is
wow.
absolutely possible to retrofit a car-centric city. We just are sort of choosing not to, and that like reinforces the idea that to get anywhere worth going to, you need a car.
I'm going to get into a few of the numbers in a second. You saying Mexico City is ironic because I'm going there for the first time in a few months. Secondly, I think about how I live in Chicago, but I lived in LA on and off for 10 years. Very different ways of addressing this, where Chicago has the L, they have the Metro. Buses are very dependable even in the snow. And in LA, everyone tries to avoid the bus like the plague. When I look at Los Angeles, I know you said, this is 70 some years ago. I remember reading up that there were a ton of trains available back in the day in LA, and it just got decimated by the automobile industry. What will it take to go back to Americans and freedom? What will it take for American citizens to go with plans of mass transit, like public goods, essentially, to improve their lives and also improve the lives of others, even though historically now they think the only way to get around is a car? Like, what would it take to change hearts and minds, Megan?
I mean, I think what it takes is like riding good transit and realizing in a place that has really good transit, like how much you have access to and how like the ease of access and the affordability of that access. So for a lot of people, it takes visiting a city with really good transit, which I know I understand it's not available to every American, but I think like I said, it's hard to live in a city like Austin and really kind of imagine how your life might transform with good transit. And then it's worth saying like the other thing is like again, I keep harping on the money because like I think we do not fund transit. And so to really get people to change their minds around what could a city that has robust transit look like we need to fund it like we want people to ride it. So that means, excuse me, sorry.
You're good.
That means, so in the every 7 years, Congress passes a surface transportation reauthorization. And since 1982, since the Ronald Reagan administration, we have spent 80 cents of every dollars on road and 20 cents on transit. Every time that surface transportation reauthorization comes up, there's always people in Congress who say, hey, maybe we should spend a little bit more of federal money on transit systems. Maybe it should be 50-50. If that changed, that would be transformative. Most transit operators use local revenue to fund their operations, which means they just don't have a lot of money to build good transit that people can ride. And like the difference, as you've experienced in Chicago versus Los Angeles, like a bus or a train that comes every 5 or 10 minutes versus one that comes every 30 is
Mm-hmm.
like an absolute world of difference. And like you don't change minds until you have a bus that comes every 5 minutes and people realize they can rely on it to get where they need to go.
Amen to that.